afternoon, and thank you to Jeff and to Chris for pulling this amazing conference together and all these educators. I know I got you guys after lunch, so I want to start off with some audience participation. How many of you regularly engage with students, teachers, tutors, or even fellow students? Great. How about school officials, administrators, people who decide what content the students will interact with? Great. And how about technologists like myself, people who might build some of this content? I know we got some press here too, so I don't want to leave you guys out. But my goal today, as we talk about game mechanics for education, is to give all of you something useful, something practical that you can apply as you engage with your audiences. Game mechanics, which is what we'll talk about, is different from games. You know, games conjures up this image of a very interactive virtual world, but game mechanics are the tools that game designers use to make sure their audience is engaged. And so we, as educators and people who have our own audiences, can apply these things to our own practices. So we start off by defining what exactly gamification means. Gamification is not just slapping some badges onto your website. It's not raffling off a plasma TV, anything like that. Gamification is a design tool. It's a design pattern that we can apply to create experiences for our audience. And so game designers use this to create their user experiences, but we as educators should keep these in mind to create education experiences for the students that work with the content, that get students engaged with the content. So we'll go through game design principles, and I'll tie them into the game mechanics that you guys might be familiar with. You know, when you see Zynga or World of Warcraft or people like that using what we know as game mechanics, these might be things like leaderboards or virtual prizes, virtual currency. Those things are side effects of game design principles. So to really understand how to incorporate gamification into our content, we have to start with the principles that game designers use. And the thing is that game designers get up every day, and morning, noon, and night, what they think about is how to engage their audience with the game that they're creating. They want their users to spend as much time as possible in the game, and then that ties into what the company might do, upselling or social experiences within the virtual world. So what we can take from gamification is the same lessons. We should be looking to get our students' attention and our audience's attention. So this is why we as educators should care about bringing this into our world. With these principles, we should be able to engage students at a higher level and at a deeper level with any piece of content. Game designers work with something called the attention economy. It's a simple concept. It just says that every user has a finite amount of attention. And so this breaks down into commitments that they might have, school, sleep, so on, and a certain amount of discretionary time. So game designers want to maximize the amount of discretionary time that the user spends on their game. And some of you teachers might know that sometimes that discretionary time overlaps into your classroom, so we also want to put an end to that. But this finite amount of attention, the lesson here is that everyone is competing for this attention. So when we have content, whether it's math or English or an Xbox game, it's all in competition for the same space in the student's mind. And so we really should be using all of the tools at our disposal to get our content at the top. So one of the things that game designers think a lot about is motivation. What motivates people to engage with content? And how many of you think you know what's fun for yourself? Well, I hope everyone. But the thing is that back, many decades ago, we thought that everyone had their unique definition of what's fun. Everyone was special. Everyone had fun in some of their own ways. But that's really not that true. It turns out that there's 4 core groups of people, or 4 different types of fun, 4 different core motivations that drive people to play games, to interact with content. And this breaks down into something discovered by a guy called Bartle. They're player types, and there are really only 4 different types that drive the reasons that people interact with content. Some people, we'll start with one of the most common. A lot of people get into a game, especially like World of Warcraft, just to socialize. And I'm sure you see this in your classroom too. Some students are just there to socialize. And ideally, we'd be able to leverage that to educate them as well. And we'll talk about how to apply that with some examples in a minute. Some people are there to explore. This is one of the ideals, curiosity-driven learning, exploring the whole space and really engaging with the content at a deep level. Some people engage in social competition, and there's two different kinds. There's achievements, which is when people get badges or other rewards, and so as teachers you might hand out such rewards in your classroom. But the key here is that anyone could achieve them. And other people play games purely to compete. And so what that means to them is that it's not enough that they achieve something, but also they have to know that because of them, someone else didn't achieve that thing. So it's a very competitive thing. And the nice thing is that since we want to have a collaborative classroom, this is actually one of the smallest groups of people. So we can work that aspect into lessons, but it's not the biggest one. So what this boils down to is different motivational styles, different ways that people have of thinking. So when we design lesson plans or experiences for students to engage with content, we're used to thinking about learning styles. People might have a visual learning style, an auditory learning style, a tactile style, and so on. And teachers are used to mixing these things up to make sure that everyone in the audience is engaged for some part of the lesson. In the same way, we should be thinking about motivational styles. So we have people who are driven to socialize, to explore, to achieve, and to compete. And by hitting all four of these within a particular piece of content, we can similarly make sure that students get motivated and engaged to work with the content. So it's very much a parallel way of looking at how we structure our classroom interactions and interactions outside the classroom, anywhere that we seek to educate students or our audience. So now we have this understanding of what drives people to engage. It breaks down into these four different types of things. So I want to give you several different examples of traditional teaching tools, which maybe some of you have actually used in your classroom. I'm sure you have. And with our new toolkit, this game design principle, we can examine why these things work in the classroom. One great example is the Boy Scouts merit badge system, which, as you can see, taps into several of these different aspects. Badges are handed out as achievements. They function as social hubs, so people working on a similar badge can talk about them. People come together over these things. And there's an exploration component because you have to prove that you really explored a space in order to get your badge. So this is a common theme that we'll see. There's not four clean categories that people fit into. Everyone resonates with different levels of each of these four things. And so we want to make sure to include multiple components when we design these experiences. Another really common technique that works well in the traditional classroom is giving students jobs. And the great thing is that when you position a job as a reward, something like a hall monitor or a tutor, the student feels it's a reward. It taps into their desire for status, for power. It really does. And the great thing is that they'll do this job for free because it's been positioned as a reward. It's positioned as something that they've achieved, that they're competing for because someone else won't be able to get that job. And it's something that allows them to socialize as they work in that job. So again, we're hitting multiple components by using this sort of reward. One of the things that we see from game design principles is deciding how to reward people and how to position these rewards. So with subtle differences, we can see that it makes a big difference to position. Instead of a job or a task that has to be done, here's a reward that someone gets to do if you can prove yourself capable. And students, especially young students, as we know, respond well to this sort of allowed responsibility. I'm going to talk about something that we're all here for today as well, teaching with technology. And this is a place where all of these things that we've talked about come together. So we bring in traditional teaching techniques, we bring in technology, and it's important not to forget that we're working with an audience. This is the core, this is what should motivate our design of bringing technology into the classroom. And so I'll give you several great examples of how this has been done well. One of my favorite studies was a very recent paper that was released where the professors and TAs for a particular class used Twitter to engage their students. And the way it worked was whenever a difficult topic or any topic was covered in the classroom, the TA would then follow up on Twitter and say, we're organizing a study group. You know, respond with this hashtag directly to the TA, and you can just indicate your interest in the group. So what happens is that students that would otherwise not engage, might not be vocal in the classroom, will instead engage with the content. They'll engage directly with the TA, and then the TA, again, all over Twitter, simply connects the few students that might have responded about this one topic and says, hey, here's a study group going on about calculus at 3 p.m. in the library in this room. And this goes out on Twitter, and the students meet up. And so the TA can really step back and simply let the students interact with each other. And so again, this achieves several things. We achieve the innate and universal goal of people to socialize. They get together to socialize over this content. They engage with it deeply, they explore it, so we know that they'll be learning with each other. Similarly, another great peer-based teaching technique is used in some university lectures where the teacher might ask a question, some sort of conceptual physics or math question, let's say, to the class, where you really have to think about the principles. And it's not a calculation, you just have to think about how, say, the atoms in a metal might expand or contract, and then just say yes or no to a conceptual question. So what happens is that the professor will pose this question. Students in the class will immediately think about it and raise their hands yes or no. And traditionally, what would happen is the professor might explain something, or he might use that as a signal to move on if everyone understands. But in order to tap into these same principles, to socialize, to explore, and to achieve, what the professor instead does is encourages people to turn to each other, find someone who gave the opposite answer, and try to convince them. And so this works really well when it's one of those conceptual head-scratcher questions and people get together, they reason with each other, and then the professor asks the same question. And what happens a shockingly large amount of the time is that many more people are correct. So again, we've hit multiple of these core motivations that drive people. They're socializing over the content, they're achieving something where they can see immediately if they're right or wrong. They're exploring with each other, reasoning by themselves about the content. And in the few classrooms where this has been used, this technique again works very well. And you can see how technology might play into this with classroom responders, with clickers where the professor can pose a question and so on. So I'll give exactly one shameless plug for myself because I'm an entrepreneur. My company is working on a software that allows this for universities and high school classrooms. So if you follow me on Twitter, you'll get to see it come together and get on the beta to work on this with your students with any device. And this is one of the things that we have to keep in mind when building this technology, is that we want to engage students independent of their device, to go past the device and into the content and the social interactions. I have a ton more examples, but I'm about to be played off the stage, so I'll encourage you to, again, follow me on Twitter, where we'll be writing about this, sharing tons more case studies, and I'll recap by saying, simply remember these 4 core motivations that drive people to engage with content. Whenever there's discretionary time, people engage with the things that they find the most rewarding. And the reward comes from having fun in these 4 ways. They socialize, they explore, they achieve, or they compete. As educators, we want to tap into multiple or all of these facets when we structure our educational experiences, because we know that the people that we're competing with for the students' attention are using all of these tools, so we shouldn't hold anything back. Thanks, and happy lesson planning.